Elias had lived in the valley all his life. His cabin sat on the edge of the forest, where the mountains touched the sky and the wind whispered secrets through the trees. He liked the quiet. Every day was predictable. He would fix radios, chop wood, and watch the sun sink behind the mountains. But that evening, everything changed. The sky tore open with a streak of blue fire, brighter than any star he had ever seen. It didn't fall like a meteor. It twisted and spun, glowing with colors he couldn't name. The ground shook beneath his feet, rattling the windows, and his dog barked frantically before running under the table. Elias froze, heart hammering, and ran toward the source of the light. The valley behind his cabin was usually peaceful, covered with soft grass and tall pines, but now it was a chaos of smoke and sparks. In the center of the clearing lay the wreckage. Metal twisted like melted silver, glowing hot in some places and charred black in others. A strange humming came from the ruins, low and vibrating, like the world itself was alive. Then he saw her. At first he thought she was a trick of the firelight, a shadow moving among the metal. But as he drew closer, he saw the silver of her skin, smooth and reflective, almost liquid in the flickering light. Her limbs were tangled in strange restraints that pulsed with energy, and her eyes, bright, golden, and full of fear, snapped open. She tried to crawl away, but her strength failed her. She collapsed, gasping. Elias felt a strange tug in his chest. This was no animal. This was something alive, scared, and alone. He crouched beside her. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she understood. She flinched and tried to recoil, hissing in a language he didn't recognize. Her voice was sharp, urgent, filled with panic. Elias instinctively wrapped his arms around her to lift her up. She struggled, clawing at his arms with trembling fingers, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Please don't." Her words, though unintelligible to him, carried meaning. Fear was universal. He could feel it. Carefully, he carried her toward the cabin, trying not to jostle her too much. Sparks flew from the wreck behind them, and the smell of ozone and burning metal made his eyes water. When they reached the cabin, Elias laid her down on a blanket in front of the fireplace. She shook violently, but not from cold. He realized it was pure terror. He piled extra blankets over her, but she shrank away, curling into herself like a creature too small to be noticed. Her wrists glowed faintly under the blankets, bound by some kind of alien device. Every time she moved, the cuffs sparked. Elias tried to loosen them with his tools, pliers, screwdrivers, even a hammer, but the restraints were unlike anything he had seen. They seemed alive, almost reacting to her fear. She watched him the entire time with those wide, golden eyes full of suspicion and pain. "You want to experiment," she spat out, broken and jagged words laced with panic. Elias froze. He shook his head gently. "No, I don't even know what that is. I just want to help." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. He wasn't like the hunters she must have known. He didn't have a weapon, a lab, or instruments. Just a quiet cabin, a warm fire, and hands that trembled as much as hers. Lightning cracked outside, lighting the room in stark white. The alien hugged herself, staring at the fire as if it could shield her from the unknown. Elias stacked firewood closer, making sure the room felt safe, though he didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. Finally, her breathing slowed. She whispered her name, almost afraid to speak it aloud. Elias smiled softly. "I'm Elias, you're safe here." It wasn't trust, not yet, but for the first time a small spark of it appeared. His wide eyes flickered toward him, searching, questioning, just a little less afraid. And for Elias, staring at a being from beyond the stars, he felt something he had never felt before: responsibility, fear, and a strange hope that maybe, somehow, he could help her survive. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by the smell of firewood and burning metal from the valley, the human and the alien began a story neither had expected, a story that would change both their lives forever. Morning came slowly in the valley. The sun's pale light filtered through the cabin windows, casting long, soft shadows on the wooden floor. Elias had stayed awake most of the night, watching over. She had barely slept, trembling under the blankets, her golden eyes wide and alert as if the shadows themselves were enemies. When she finally stirred, the glowing cuffs around her wrists pulsed softly, each beat sending a small shock through her arms. She winced and drew her hands closer to her chest, but there was no hiding. Elias had tried everything the night before: pliers, a hammer, even soaking the cuffs in water, but nothing worked. The alien restraint seemed alive, almost judging him with a quiet, cold intelligence. Elias knelt beside her, careful not to make sudden movements. "I'm going to try again," he said gently. His voice was calm, soft, meant to soothe. Gaze flicked up, eyes sharp and wary. Her entire body stiffened as if bracing for a strike. "No," she whispered, her broken human words almost perfect in their fear. "Do not touch." He paused. He didn't know what to do. She wasn't asking for help, she was demanding safety. But her fear was understandable. Any creature would be afraid if a stranger suddenly handled devices that could hurt them. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elias said. "I just want you free." For a long moment she studied him. The golden light in her eyes softened ever so slightly, but only a little. Trust was fragile and had been broken long before she landed in his valley. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, rattling the cabin's windows. Elias could hear the valley waking, birds, rustling leaves, the distant hum of a stream. It was peaceful, at least compared to the storm of fear in the room. Shifted slightly under the blankets, enough to show the faint shimmer of her silver skin. Her eyes followed his every move, sharp and calculating, never letting her guard down. She tried to tug at the cuffs herself. Sparks leaped off the glowing metal, making her gasp in pain. Elias flinched but did not look away. "See, you can't break them alone," he said softly. "Maybe together we can figure it out." His gaze snapped to his, suspicion flashing like fire. "Together, I do not trust you," she said. Her voice trembled, but the words were clear. Elias didn't argue, he simply nodded. "I understand, I just want to help." The alien watched him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then slowly, she let her hands rest on the blanket instead of pulling them away. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Hours passed. Elias tried tool after tool, scratching his head, muttering to himself, testing every method he could imagine. Each failure made him more determined. He could see the exhaustion building in his body, the way her energy flickered like a weak flame in a storm. Her golden eyes followed him without blinking, studying every movement. Finally, he stopped. He sat back on his heels, exhausted, hands covered in grime from the metal. "I don't know how to open them," he admitted quietly, "but I'll find a way." Stared at him, and for the first time fear mixed with something else, confusion. She had expected humans to be cruel, violent, or indifferent. Yet this one, a simple man from a quiet valley, kept trying, not for curiosity, not for power, but for her. You try," she asked softly, her voice fragile. "Even when I am strange, dangerous." Elias gave a small smile. "Everyone deserves a chance to be safe," he said simply. "Even you." His eyes glimmered with something new, hope. She didn't understand it fully, and she wasn't sure she deserved it. But the warmth of the fire, the careful hands of a human who refused to give up, stirred a tiny spark of trust in her chest. For the first time since the crash, allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The shackles still bound her, but for the first time she didn't feel completely alone. Outside, the forest whispered its quiet morning song. Inside the cabin, a human and an alien began the slow, fragile work of understanding each other. And in that small, warm room, amidst fear and uncertainty, a bond began, a bond that neither sparks nor metal could break. By the time the sun reached the top of the valley, Elias had settled into a quiet routine. He brought her water, offered small meals, and did his best to make the cabin feel safe. She sat mostly under the blankets, watching him with golden eyes that seemed to study every gesture, every glance. She didn't trust him fully, not yet, but the warmth in his presence made the cold fear inside her flicker. Then came the first warning. Elias noticed strange footprints in the soft soil outside the cabin. They were deep and wide, moving in organized lines like soldiers on a mission. His chest tightened. Humans rarely left such tracks, but these were bigger, heavier, and precise. Froze when she saw them, her body taut with alarm. "Enforcers," she whispered, almost too low for him to hear. They will kill me if they find me." Elias didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Her tone carried more weight than explanation ever could. The fear in her voice mirrored the trembling of her hands, and he realized that these hunters were not ordinary. They were relentless. He had no weapons, no allies, only his courage and the strange luck that had brought into his cabin. "We need to hide," he said simply. His head jerked toward him, eyes wide with disbelief. "Hide here. You would hide me, human." "I will," Elias said firmly. "No one touches you while I'm here." He guided her into a small underground storage bunker he had built for emergencies during winter storms. It was cramped, dark, and dusty, but it would shield them from searchers above. Hesitated at the entrance, her golden eyes scanning the small space, judging it, measuring threats. Finally, she slipped inside, shivering from more than just the cold. Minutes later, the forest outside vibrated with soft, humming footsteps. Light flared from above, search drones moving slowly, scanning the ground with deadly precision. His breathing hitched and Elias pressed his hand gently over hers. "Stay calm. Don't make a sound." She nodded, but it was hard. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to flee or fight. Elias held his breath as the beams passed directly over their hidden bunker. Sparks from the scanners brushed the edges of the cabin, and the shadows stretched like long, dark fingers. He could feel trembling beside him, tiny but tense, waiting for the worst. When the light moved on, she exhaled shakily, her face pale in the dim glow of the bunker. They come for me. I cannot fight them alone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not alone," Elias said softly. He didn't smile because there was no time for joy. But his words were steady, grounded in certainty he didn't yet feel himself. "I'll face them too. Whatever comes, we face it together." Looked at him surprised. The humans she had feared, her people had warned her, were not supposed to protect her. They were supposed to harm her. Yet here was one, small and fragile compared to the hunters, speaking courage as if it were a shield. Hours passed in silence, only broken by the distant hum of the drones moving through the trees. Clung to the blanket, but she allowed her body to relax just a little. She studied Elias quietly. Something about him was different from every being she had ever known. He didn't see her as a weapon or a fugitive. He only saw her as someone in danger, someone worth saving. The bond between them began to grow, silent and fragile. Trust was not given freely. It was earned in quiet moments like these. Had survived for years by running, hiding, and fighting. Now in this human cabin she learned something new. Protection without threat, care without expectation, and courage without armor. Outside, the forest returned to its calm rhythm, the sounds of life rising once more. But inside the bunker, in the soft shadows of wood and blankets, Elias discovered something rarer than peace, the beginning of trust. And though the danger was far from over, the first line of their fight had been drawn, not with weapons but with hearts willing to face fear together. The cabin was quiet again, but the silence was heavier this time. Elias had kept the fire burning, its warmth brushing against silver skin. She sat on the floor, knees drawn close, staring at the flames, as though searching for answers in the flickering light. Elias handed her a cup of warm water. Her hands shook as she took it, the liquid trembling like her thoughts. For the first time, she let herself be still, letting the human's presence fill the room with safety. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I escaped." Her golden eyes flicked toward him, wary. "I did not mean to leave them." Elias nodded slowly. He didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. He sat across from her, careful to give her space. "They called me a mistake," she continued, voice tight with pain. "A creation that should not exist. They wanted to destroy me." Her lips trembled as she spoke, and her hands clenched the blanket around her. I ran because I could not die." Elias leaned forward, heart tightening. He didn't fully understand the politics of alien worlds, but the fear in her eyes was universal. Anyone would fight to live. Anyone would run from death. "They gave me strength," she whispered, "more than anyone else, but they feared it. They feared me." Her gaze fell to the floor. "I was hunted, even by my own people." Elias swallowed hard, trying to find words that would comfort her, but words felt too small for the story she carried. Instead, he reached out, carefully resting a hand near hers, not touching yet offering reassurance. "Strength is not a crime," he said softly. "You deserve to survive." Blinked at him, almost startled. She had expected judgment, experiments, fear, or cruelty. Humans in her mind were like the enforcers, cold, quick to act. Yet this one, small and simple, offered only care. No threat, no expectation. I have never trusted anyone," she admitted. Her voice wavered. "Not my people, not my friends, no one." Her golden eyes glimmered with a flicker of emotion she could not name. "But you are different." Elias gave a faint smile. "I'm not different, I'm human. We make mistakes. We get scared. But we also try to protect each other. That's all I know how to do." She studied him, searching for deception, but found none. The calm in his eyes, the careful way he moved around her, the warmth in his presence. It was all real. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small thought. Maybe not every being in the universe wanted to control her, hurt her, or destroy her. The wind rattled the cabin walls, a soft reminder of the valley outside. Drew in a shaky breath. You would not send me back?" she asked hesitantly, the words trembling as much as her body. "No," Elias said firmly. "Not while I can stop it. You're safe here, at least for now." A flicker of relief crossed her features, subtle but unmistakable. The fear that had gripped her since her creation, the fear of being hunted, experimented on, destroyed, shifted slightly. She was not safe in the world, but she could be safe here in this small cabin, under the watch of someone who simply cared. Hours passed in quiet conversation, spoke in small fragments, revealing hints of her past, enough for Elias to understand the danger she had escaped. She had been trained, altered, and feared as a weapon she never wanted to be. Yet she had survived by her wits, her strength, and her determination to escape. Elias listened, never judging, never pressing too hard. He only offered what she needed most, understanding. And slowly, in that room filled with firelight and shadows, a fragile trust began to form. Curled closer to the blankets, her golden eyes reflecting the flames, she realized with a cautious hope that she might finally have found someone who saw her differently, not as a weapon, not as a fugitive, but as a being who deserved care. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she might survive, not just hide, not just escape, but truly live. And in that moment, with the human beside her, she felt the smallest spark of hope ignite inside her chest. The night was colder than usual. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the cabin windows and pushing the shadows into corners where fear could hide. Sat on the floor, her back against the wall, shivering despite the blankets. The glowing cuffs around her wrists pulsed with an erratic rhythm, brighter now, almost alive. Each pulse sent sharp jolts of pain through her arms, making her gasp and curl inward. Elias knelt beside her, worry etched across his face. "You're burning up," he said softly. He tried to inspect the cuffs again, but every movement made the devices spark. He had never seen anything like them. They weren't just restraints, they were reactive, intelligent in their cruelty. The metal seemed to hum with energy, almost sensing her fear, feeding on it. His golden eyes met his, wide and filled with panic. "They react to danger," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, weak. "If they sense enforcers nearby, they tighten until I cannot breathe." Elias swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly, but he refused to show fear. "We'll fix this," he said. "I won't let them hurt you anymore." But as he tested tools, wires, even fire from the stove, nothing worked. The cuffs remained stubborn, unyielding, a trap designed to break her body slowly. Watched him silently, her fear giving way to frustration. "I cannot survive like this," she hissed, clenching her teeth. He paused, meeting her gaze. "Then we'll try something else together." His voice was steady, determined. He couldn't let her panic. If she did, the cuffs would respond and she could be seriously hurt, or worse. Elias remembered the generator outside, the long electrical cable he had used to power the cabin's lights. It was dangerous. Too much current could fry the restraints, maybe even hurt her. But the fear in her eyes left him no choice. "Hold still," he said firmly. Stiffened immediately, but the sharp pulse of the cuffs forced her to comply. He moved carefully, connecting the wire to the metal locks. Sparks flew immediately, blinding in the dim room, and cried out, flinching against the shock. Elias gritted his teeth. He adjusted the wire, grounding it carefully, channeling the energy into the locks instead of her. The first cuff shuddered violently, groaning like metal in pain. His breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide with fear, but he held it steady. Then, with a final flash, the cuff shattered, falling to the floor in broken pieces. Gasped, staring at her free hand in disbelief. The glow was gone. She flexed her fingers, trembling but alive. Elias didn't pause. He turned to the second cuff, applying the same technique. It resisted, sparks flying more violently this time, but finally it cracked and fell to the ground with a dull metallic thud. His chest heaved. She looked at her free hands as if she couldn't believe they belonged to her. Then her golden eyes met Elias. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with something beyond gratitude, something closer to awe. Elias exhaled, exhaustion washing over him. He slumped back on his heels, arms sore and trembling, but he smiled faintly. "I told you, you're not alone." For the first time since the crash, let herself relax completely. She sat upright, her shoulders easing, and allowed a small, shaky smile to appear. The shackles were gone, but the walls she had built around herself remained. Yet in that human's presence, she felt the first tiny crack in her armor, a spark of trust that maybe, just maybe, she could survive here. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin, a fragile peace settled. Sparks from the broken cuffs glimmered on the floor, reminders of danger overcome, of fear confronted, and courage found in unexpected places. Whispered almost to herself, "Perhaps not all humans are cruel." Elias chuckled softly. "Some of us just try," he said. And for the first time they both knew that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about finding someone willing to stand by your side, even in the darkest night. Dawn crept over the valley, painting the forest in pale gold. The calm, however, was only temporary. From the tree line a low hum vibrated through the air, a warning Elias recognized instantly. He froze, sensing danger before it appeared. His golden eyes widened, every muscle in her body tensing. They are here," she whispered, almost shaking. Her voice carried fear, but also a fierce determination. She had fought to survive, and she would not go quietly. 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the forest. Towering, armored, and humming with energy, the enforcers advanced. Their weapons glowed with a deadly charge, scanning the cabin with precision. Elias' heart pounded. He had no proper weapon, no training, only courage and determination. Moved instinctively in front of him. "You stay back," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "They want me, not you." But Elias stepped forward, holding a piece of scrap metal like a shield. "I don't care who they want. You're not alone," he said firmly. His voice carried the same calm determination he had shown since the first moment he met her. The enforcers stopped, their weapons pulsing in response. Light flared as they demanded her surrender. His body tensed, ready to fight. She didn't trust them, not after everything they had done. But Elias stood there, human and fragile, yet unyielding, giving her a strange kind of strength. His energy flared. The air shimmered around her, bending and twisting as raw power pushed outward. She could feel the dangerous pulse of the Enforcer's weapons against her senses. Elias stood firm, distracting one of them just long enough for her to act. Sparks flew, light danced across the cabin walls, and the sounds of battle echoed in the valley. Elias ducked as a beam struck the wall behind him. Dust fell and the cabin groaned. He braced himself, heart racing, fear tempered by the need to protect her. He had never thought himself a warrior, but in this moment, courage was all he had. Struck again. Her golden eyes blazed, her silver skin shimmering in the morning light. One enforcer fell, its armor collapsing in on itself, sparks spraying across the cabin floor. Another stumbled backward, blinded by the sudden energy surge. Elias used the opening to push behind him, holding his makeshift shield high. The third enforcer was the most dangerous. It advanced steadily, calculating, unflinching. But Elias did not hesitate. He ran forward, throwing debris in its path, drawing its attention away from. Her hands glowed with controlled energy, and she struck with precision, felling the last threat. The cabin was silent again, except for their heavy breathing. Dust and broken pieces of armor lay scattered across the floor. Stumbled forward, her chest heaving, and Elias caught her before she fell. The adrenaline still coursed through both their veins, but for the first time, the immediate threat was gone. She looked up at him, golden eyes shining with gratitude and awe. You risked yourself," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For me." Elias shook his head, exhausted. "Not for you alone, because I couldn't let anyone die in my home, not while I could help." For the first time, allowed herself to relax. The enforcers were defeated, but she knew this was only a temporary victory. Her life was still in danger, and she still needed to find a way to stabilize her energy. Yet, standing there in the cabin, looking at the human who had saved her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, she felt a strength she had never known. Elias offered a small, tired smile. "We'll face whatever comes next together," he said. Nodded, letting the warmth of trust and survival fill her chest. For the first time since her creation, she realized that courage could come in unexpected forms, and that sometimes humans, small, fragile, and imperfect, could be the greatest allies of all. Outside, the valley returned to its calm rhythm. But inside the cabin, in the quiet after the storm, two beings, one human, one alien, had found something more powerful than fear. The bond of survival, trust, and shared courage. The valley was quiet once more. The wind whispered gently through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Elias and sat on the cabin floor, both exhausted, their breath still heavy from the battle with the enforcers. The morning sun filtered through the windows, painting the room in pale gold, but the warmth did little to ease the tension that lingered. Flexed her free hand slowly, still feeling the hum of residual energy within her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she struggled to steady herself. Elias watched her, concern etched into every line of his face. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Unstable, my energy," she admitted, her golden eyes shadowed with worry. "I need the stabilizer. Without it, I cannot survive long." She looked down at the floor, shaking slightly. "It is on my, but I cannot return. They will kill me." Elias' hands clenched in thought. He had no experience with alien devices or technology, but he could see the urgency in her eyes. "Then we find another way," he said firmly. "I won't let you die here. We'll figure it out together." She met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her expression, fear, relief, and something else, hope. "You risk so much for me," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "I cannot ask more." "You don't need to ask," Elias said. "I'm already here. I choose to help. That's enough." For a long moment they sat in silence. The energy within her pulsed, erratic but slowly calming in his presence. It was as if his unwavering courage, his quiet insistence on protecting her, was grounding her in a way nothing else could. realized with a trembling heart that humans, fragile and imperfect, had something her people did not: empathy, trust, and the will to care without conditions. Finally she spoke, voice low but determined. "Then I choose to live, not alone, not in fear. I trust you with my life, Elias." Elias' heart caught in his chest. He had never expected such words, such raw, powerful vulnerability from a being so alien, so dangerous, so strong. "You won't regret it," he said quietly, his own voice filled with steady resolve. "We face this together from now on." Reached out her hand trembling and placed her palm over his heart. The warmth radiated from her touch, and he felt an energy unlike anything he had ever known. It was gentle, steadying, and it flowed into him as much as it did into her. Slowly, the pulsing inside her began to stabilize. She could feel her body calming, her energy settling into a rhythm that would sustain her. Tears threatened to fill her golden eyes, not from pain but from relief. She had never felt trust like this, never allowed herself to rely on another being so fully. And yet, here in the small cabin, she felt it, the rare, fragile, and precious sense of belonging. Elias smiled faintly, though exhaustion weighed heavily on him. "See," he said, "you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to face it alone." Outside, the valley stretched toward the horizon, peaceful and untouched, yet full of unknown dangers. Inside, in the quiet warmth of a cabin filled with firelight, made a choice that would redefine her life. She chose survival, trust, and companionship over fear and solitude. She chose a future she had never dared to imagine. For the first time, looked at her new life not as a fugitive or a weapon, but as someone who could exist freely, with hope and courage. She had been hunted, betrayed, and feared, but in Elias she had found a protector, an ally, and something far more powerful than any weapon, a human willing to risk everything for her. The crash that brought her to this strange world, the fear, the pursuit, the pain, it had all led to this moment. And now, standing on the edge of fear and hope, she realized that survival was not enough. With Elias beside her, she could finally live, truly live. And so, as the valley bathed in sunlight, took her first breath of freedom without terror, her heart steadied, her spirit unbroken, and her life, once a fugitive's fight, reborn in trust, courage, and the quiet heroism of a human who chose to stand by her side.